Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about naming covalent bonds. And first, I want to say what a covalent bond is. A covalent bond happens when two nonmetals combine together and make a new compound. For example, one of the most kind of popular covalent bond we can say is carbon dioxide, which we always breathe out. It is carbon dioxide. And let me write it down. Non-metal plus non-metal, they make a covalent bond. And the reason that they're called a covalent bond is because of the fact that they share their electrons and they share one of their last valence electrons, one or two or three last valence electrons. And if you remember, valence electrons are basically the electrons that they have in their last orbital. For example, for carbon, it has four valence electrons because it has four electrons in its last orbital. So basically, once two nonmetals come together, they share their last orbital, and that makes a covalent bond. And the way we name these covalent bonds is different from the way we name ionic bonds because of the fact that they share that last orbital and also because they're nonmetals. Now let's say we have all these three compounds and we're asked to name them. The first thing we need to do is to make sure that all these compounds that we're trying to name have nonmetals in them. Carbon, oxygen, they're nonmetals, which means we're going to use this process. We have carbon and oxygen again, which means they're nonmetals, so we're going to use the process that I'm going to teach you. And we have nitrogen and oxygen, and again, because they are located in the right side of our periodic table, we know that they are nonmetals, so we're going to use the process that I'm going to share with you. Now, the first one is the one that I talked about in the beginning of the video. It's carbon dioxide. And the way we name them is really easier than the way we name ionic bonds. And the way we name them is basically we take the name of our element, our first element, which is carbon. And if this element is more than one, let's say if there was like two carbons, we would need to use one of these prefixes. But since there's only one carbon, we're just going to write the name of that element, which is carbon, which means we're not going to put monocarbon. We're just going to put the name of that element. And then we're going to look at our next element, which is oxygen. And we're gonna say how many oxygens we have in this compound. And since we have two oxygens, we're gonna use the di prefix, which means it's di. And since we already talked about this before in my ionic bond video, we know that their name is going to change to oxide. So carbon dioxide. And we give that IDE for our second element. So it's carbon dioxide. And we don't say it like mono carbon dioxide because of the fact that the first element is only one. And let's say how we're gonna name this compound. We have carbon, and again, we're not going to put that mono. We're going to say carbon. Now, for the second element, we always need to say how many of that element we have. Even if we have one oxygen, we have to mention it. That's why we're going to use the prefix of mono and then oxide. And for some people, they might write it like this. However, when you're trying to write it, you don't actually write it like this. You do monoxide. That all goes away and you write carbon monoxide. Now, let's see what nitrogen and oxygen make. First, we need to look at our compound, and as you can see, there's two nonmetals, which means we're going to use this way of naming them. So I have two nitrogens. Do we have to mention the fact that we have two nitrogens? It turns out that we need to mention that we have two nitrogens because of the fact that it's a covalent bond and we have to share that information. That's why we're going to use the prefix of di, which means it's going to be dinitrogen. Now, how many oxygens do we have? We have 3 oxygens, which means it's trioxide. So it's dinitrogen trioxide. Now let's say we have these 3 examples and we're asked to name them. First, we need to make sure that we have 2 nonmetals. As you can see, we have phosphorus and chlorine, and they're both nonmetals. We have sulfur and oxygen, and they're both nonmetals. And we have nitrogen and oxygen, which again, they're both nonmetals. And the way that I figured that out is because of the fact that I know a shortcut that the right side of our periodic table has all nonmetals. Now, how do we name our first compound? Let's look at our first element, which is phosphorus. How many phosphorus do we have? Since we see that there's no number, which means there's only 1 phosphorus, we don't have to mention that information, so we're gonna say phosphorus, phosphorus, and then we have 5 chlorine, which means we're gonna use the penta prefix, which is penta, and then chloride. Now let's see how we can name this one. As you can see, we only have 1 sulfur, which means we don't have to mention that. So we have sulfur, and then we have to mention how many oxygens we have. Since you see that there's 2 oxygens, we can say dioxide. Let's say for the fun of the game, we make this in N2O4, which means we have 2 nitrogens. Now, how do we name this? Again, we have to mention the fact that we have 2 nitrogens, so we make it dinitrogen. And then we have 4 oxygens, which means we're going to use tetra prefix, tetroxide. And because we have 2 vowels next to each other, we're just going to get rid of that A. So it's just tetroxide. And for spelling, I just want to mention that you don't have to be so careful about the spelling, because a lot of people take general chemistry just to for requirements for some majors, but if you're actually majoring in chemistry, you have to know how to spell them. But yeah, this was it for naming covalent bonds. And I just want to mention that you don't need to know all these. As long as you work with them a lot, you'll see tetra and penta a lot, maybe tri and di, tri, tetra, and penta. There might be the most important ones, and the other ones you will see them rarely, but yeah. Again, for naming covalent bonds, you have to make sure that you have 2 nonmetals, and try to go over this video again and watch it. And remember that if you have one element in that compound in the beginning of your element, you don't have to name them. You don't have to name that element. For example, this one, phosphorus and chlorine, since we only have 1 phosphorus, we're not going to mention that. We're not going to say monophosphorus. We're just going to say phosphorus pentachloride. Yeah, thank you.